Prisons are taking up more and more space on the social landscape. The great majority of people have been tricked into believing in the efficiency of imprisonment, even though the historical record clearly demonstrates that prisons do not work. A quote from Dr. Angela Y. Davis, prison abolitionist.
Trayvon Martin, Marissa Alexander, Stop and Frisk, Oscar Grant, the Jena Six. These names have come to symbolize the casualties associated with the ever-expanding prison industrial complex. As Seattle University college students, in Professor Gary Perry's sociological theory course, we were challenged to apply abstract social theories to the concrete realities of life in the PIC. This short documentary represents our attempt to theorize the roots, the causes, and the consequences of the prison industrial complex. This is not a thought exercise. This documentary is designed to serve as a resource for individuals and for communities that are committed to dismantling what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow, the prison industrial complex.
I think of a prison center somewhere where people are held against their will for something they've done wrong, but the industrial part is a little confusing.
Sounds like it's a machine. I think of gated communities outside of prisons relative to people living in the prisons.
Would say a good definition for the prison industrial complex is to first imagine it as a matrix. And by a matrix, I'm referring to this interlocking system that contributes to the growth and expansion of our prison culture in American society and globally. But it's not just about prisons, but it's about the interlocking of all other systems in our society that contribute to that. So the PIC for me is a system of incarceration that is rooted in the idea of how to control, contain, and essentially eliminate those individuals, those bodies that we consider to be problems in our society.
I would define the prison industrial complex as just a huge monster. So it monetizes discipline and punishment, right? Which is just a really, really hideous thing to do, to make money off of captive bodies in surveilled communities, in schools for that matter.
Defining the prison industrial complex is obviously a pretty big task, right? Because we know it is the intertwining of all kinds of different systems. So I actually think that Critical Resistance, which is a prison abolition organization, which has been around since the late 90s, has a definition that I use personally in my work thinking about prison abolition. So they define it as, quote, the prison industrial complex is a term we use to describe the overlapping interests of government and industry that use surveillance, policing, and imprisonment as solutions to economic, social, and political problems, end quote. So what this means is essentially you have the intertwining of all different types of systems, right? Things that we don't necessarily even think about as being necessarily directly intertwined with prisons. So for example, social services, right? Schools, medical systems, all kinds of different types of industries, immigration systems, and then of course the criminal justice system.
I would define the school-to-prison pipeline as a set of practices and even policies within certain school districts that impacts low-income and disenfranchised communities, primarily Hispanic, Latino, and African-American communities, that pushes these students through the system into the juvenile system, ultimately through prison later in life.
In the context of your work, Do you see the school-to-prison pipeline existing?
I think it definitely exists. I don't think it is as glaring as people may think outside of education. You do have to search for it. I think you see it existing when it comes to special education and the lack of resources for school districts. You see it when it comes to discipline practices, with minority students being suspended at a higher rate. We see this throughout the nation. You see it with standardized test scoring. Typically African Americans and minority students struggle more on standardized testing because that's language and practices that they don't necessarily grow up in their households speaking and practicing, and it takes longer to pick up the more so you could say the white culture's way of education. You'll see typically in our local community here in Yesler Terrace that many of the students who come from East African backgrounds typically work in group setting. But in our educational system in school, it's all individual based. And you see these students early on who struggle. The problem is if they get behind academically, are the resources going to be there in the system to help them catch up as they go throughout the system? I think this is something that can ultimately lead to that pipeline process.
I would say the school-to-prison pipeline is a system by which certain bodies, mainly young students of color and often poor, are tracked and funneled from the school system itself directly into our prison industrial complex. And by funneling, I see it as happening in a very orderly way, a structured way, and a very deliberate way, beginning with the ways in which we label youth of color primarily in our schools as problematic, and that labeling contributes to them being sorted into different classes, into certain programs, and sometimes into certain schools, if not pushed out completely from the education system, and therefore becoming susceptible to the ways in which our prison industrial complex works, right? Because of these labels, they then become hyper-surveilled in our schools, and that surveillance sometimes leads into them being profiled, and that profile leads into them becoming tracked, and by tracking, they end up becoming part of the system by these types of rules and regulations that we've created that further criminalizes their behavior and puts them in a position where they can therefore become part of the prison industrial complex. There's a very direct relationship between the disenfranchisement of individuals with felony records and the prison industrial complex. First, we need to keep in mind that the prison industrial complex, right, is born out of a moment when the disenfranchisement largely of former slaves was becoming codified into our constitutional law. And so in many ways, it picks up with that disenfranchisement that was happening at that moment and maps it onto the bodies of people who we have criminalized. So just in theory, that connection is there. But there's some very specific ways that we see the disenfranchisement playing out for individuals with felony records.
So the consequences of voter disenfranchisement, we'll start there, pretty large and basic. So first of all, it's a blow against basic citizenship rights, right? The idea that we all have a voice and that we all count. It also completely undermines the political power and self-determination of African Americans, Indigenous people, Latinos, Latinas, and people of color more broadly. So it has a real consequence in the way our political system functions, which means things that seemingly have nothing to do with prisons are impacted by this in a very direct way. So what this means to me is that we don't live in a democracy.
I have come to believe that what is most important to me must be spoken, made verbal and shared, even at the risk of having it bruised or misunderstood. A quote from Black feminist Audre Lorde. Any effort to deconstruct the PIC must decenter the privileged voices of those of us who solely theorize about the system. Those most severely impacted by the PIC must be centered. Our conversation with the gentleman we will call Jay sought to do just that.
My father, I remember when he sat me and my brother on the couch, and he was just telling us about his prison stories, about youth authority. And he was like, yeah, when I was in youth authority, I was cripping and gang banging and blah, blah, blah. And we was sitting up there with big eyes like, wow, But he wasn't introducing us until, he wasn't talking to us about when he was in high school. And, that he was one of the best players in basketball and baseball, and that, he was almost going to college. He was getting ready to go to college. But, he wanted to express about what happened in prison, in jail. So that's what we wanted to do. A lot of my family members, that's just what they did. They was either coming out of prison or they was going to prison. It was the norm. This is normal. It's normal to see guns in my house. It's normal. And I don't mean in the closet. I mean on the side of the couch. I mean under the couch. It's normal. It's normal for my house to get shot up. My house got shot up, and I didn't think nothing of it. I walked out about 10 minutes afterwards and started playing marbles. So this is why mass incarceration is such a big problem, because people in my neighborhoods is thinking of it as a norm. At our elementary school, the Bloods had to come across the canal to go to our elementary school, so we used to fight with them at elementary school, So this was another introduction to where you're getting, where you're headed. Because when we come out that gate and we see them officers, we like, oh, let me see your handcuffs or let me see your gun. We're joking, but they're telling, oh, they're going to be on you one day. Don't worry, we got something for you one day. I used to hear that all the time. When you going to get in the back of my car? You're going to be in the back of my car one day. This is what we growing up looking at. And I think that if we would have been prepared, meaning like if they taught some type of law, not in elementary, but in junior high school, I'm talking about the first 6th, 7th grade, they hit you with it as soon as you get in there. These are your basic laws. These are your rights, and this is what can and can't be done. And you need to know this, because I know when I got in court, speaking of juvenile hall, not my adult system, but when I got in the juvenile hall, I didn't know a damn thing they was talking about. They was a blah, 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 boom. And then you look over at this guy who's supposed to be protecting you, and he's like, oh, don't worry about it, just sign right here. They would lock a juvenile up for life. Just think about how many people have you guys seen go on TV and they say, oh, this juvenile, he committed this crime. They're talking about sentencing, they're talking about charging him as an adult. Wait a minute. What are you talking about charging him as an adult? He's not 18. You can't do that. But they do it all the time. And now your little 13, 14-year-old is sitting in a men's prison around other people that's just waiting to either take advantage of them in some form or another, whether it's them giving them what they call game about the drugs or gangs or whatever other criminal aspect that they want this individual to be in, to join their cause. Because that's basically what's up in there. It's different causes. And you're going to be a part of somebody's cause or be a cause. That's basically how it's going to go. So this whole school to prison pipeline is so real. How are we allowing these people to get wrapped up in this prison system and thinking that nothing's going to come out of it? Because a lot of people that come out of prison are so angry for either whether it was the prosecutor, they felt like the prosecutor did them wrong, didn't pay attention to their case, or if they went to prison and they're upset with their family because their family didn't stay in touch with them, or some people just be literally mad at the world. You know, they come out and they just feel like everybody's against them. And especially when you say, I can't get a job because I have a felony, or I can't live in this apartment complex because I have a felony. I cannot put my name on a lease because of my felony. It's like a stamp, it's like a red stamp. Or, for instance, where I'm living, where I've been fortunate to stay for the past, year or two, about a year. We've been living here for about a year and a half now, and we had to pay $3,000 to stay in this apartment because I have a felon, and the person that was the manager at that time knew it. And so they was like, well, if you guys want an apartment, you got to give us $3,000, and no, you guys won't have no questions asked, blah, blah, blah. So that's what we did. We waited till we got the money together, gave them the money, and then after that, we moved in. Well, since that individual had a stroke, she had a stroke. So the new management is like, they want to know everybody that's in this place, and if you have a felony, you got to go. And that was one of the things about when the person moved in here, because when she took over as manager, because she was around when the other manager made the deal. So she knew that my girl was there, supposed to be there by herself. So it's just become a challenge for me to wash my clothes. When I go home, I just make sure the manager and them is not around, and then I drive up to the little parking area and go park. But all because I got this felony. You can't. People are not willing to take the chance to allow you to live in an apartment complex or hire you as a person, employee or whatever, to work in their environment, because they just don't want to. They don't want to trust that felony. And it's like, whatever I did to acquire this felony, that happened back whenever it happened, and I've already got chastised for this. I've already been in trouble for this. So what are you sitting here worried about my felon for? That has nothing to do with my rent. It has nothing to do with my cleanliness or anything. I don't understand. But right now, I have to be careful about what's going on around our living situation, because they easily kick us out just if they hear I got a felon. I know you have to earn respect, but I'm saying they don't give us that chance. We're just asking for a chance when we come out, basically.
Because the school-to-prison pipeline is become such a normalized system, I would say now, within our U.S. education system, I think disrupting the system itself requires that we really reimagine what is education in our society.
Every kid has a talent. It's just we have to have enough adults, enough people to take time and invest in these young people to find that talent, to bring it out of them. And I think that is something that we need to do collectively as a society, as a local community, to disrupt this school-to-prison pipeline.
If you can, to the extent that you can, just try to take control of your situation and rely on folks who have your best interests at heart, and not to rely on the state to solve every single problem.
And luckily, I didn't have to deal with prison. I didn't have to deal with correctional facilities or juvenile detention because of the love and the support that I had.
There are some national efforts that have been taking place for a pretty long time. The Sentencing Project, for example, has been one example where you have had a strong sort of watchdog group that has tried to push for the changes in state legislation, which is where a lot of this happens around voting rights for individuals with felony records. There's some local grassroots organizing I've also seen.
YUIR, Youth Undoing Institutional Racism, and EPIC, Ending the Prison Industrial Complex, are two community organizations working to dismantle the PIC.
How can we disrupt the prison industrial complex?
Well, there are many ways. Right now, as part of YUIR, we created this group called EPIC, which stands for End the Prison Industrial Complex, and our goal is to abolish prison
we can educate each other about it. I think that one of the biggest reasons why people don't have a problem with it is because they don't understand how it affects them.
The fact that we have this jail that's so close to us and that we never talk about it, we never hear about it. When I tell my students about it, they look at me and they have no idea that there's a jail where young people are locked up in cages just a few blocks away from where we are. So I think raising awareness about that is one thing as well, and thinking about what are those connections. What is the connection between an institution of higher learning and this juvenile detention facility? One of the things Washington Incarceration Stops Here is doing is asking people to fill out postcards about their vision for communities without prisons.
We create a normalization around disenfranchisement because we have created this assumption that individuals who have been criminalized are not deserving of any rights. So to me, to disrupt this, while we can have actions and we can have programmatic changes, if we don't change the mindset and the cultural way that we think about crime and who we deem criminals in our society, which is heavily racist, classist, sexist, and gendered, then we will continue to find ways to disenfranchise these individuals.
It's hard for inmates, convicts, prisoners, whatever you want to call it, to come out of the belly of the beast, to come out of prison and try to function in society, but it's even harder when society is not trying to allow you to function.